Utham, I'm a Keralite. I didn't grow up in Kerala, but I spent my summer vacations in Kerala. And I remember this very, I think, magical concept. In Malayalam, it used to be called Lelam, right? Which is an auction, right? I stayed in the small village in the backwater, near the backwaters. And every now and then, my dad, mom, grandparents, etc., would say, for great fish, we need to wake up really early in the morning and go to this nearby jetty for the auction. And I was a kid and I was like, what is this magical place where,
The auction.
and it happens early in the morning. So it's like, before there's even light, right? And you can't go as a kid. And it was like this magical place where you get the best fish, which you normally never get. There's obviously a link to auctions and Captain Fresh. Has that changed? I'm talking about, I don't know, like 30 years, 40 years back. You've studied auctions, especially fish auctions. Are the auctions of 2025 fundamentally different from the auctions of, 1985?
I think the short answer is no.
Wow.
Short answer is no. And we have a long way to go through in terms of why it's not changed and what are the levers there and how is it panning out between a Kerala to a Kolkata to, obviously we can zoom out into Mediterranean to Billingsgate and Grimsby and go to San Diego, San Francisco, talk about all of these coasts and fishing villages and how they've evolved. But short answer to your question is no, it's not changed as much.
How many such markets were auctions? I'm assuming these are all coastal.
So let's talk about just Indian ecosystem. India produces around 15 million tons of seafood, fish and seafood. That puts India amongst the second largest aquaculture producer, around maybe fourth or fifth largest marine cod producer. And India is in Indian Ocean, which is relatively underexploited compared to rest of the oceans. And
the
there
Atlantic, for instance.
Yes, there are broadly four oceans. There is Pacific, which is the king. Then you have Atlantic. Then you have Indian. And then there is this Mediterranean, which is also in some sense a cradle of fishing industry. Obviously, from a overfishing standpoint, Mediterranean is the worst affected. And then you have Atlantic, then you have Pacific, and then Indian in that order. Largely because of what you mentioned. Indian Ocean, thanks to it sharing borders with an Africa, with the Middle East, with India, with Indonesia, the fishing is by and large artisanal in nature.
So it's not the industrialized deep sea trawlers.
Yeah, it's not as much industrialized deep sea trawlers. There is only big bad boy in this entire territory. It's not difficult to guess. It's China. Only they have these monster of industrialized vessels. And to give you a context on what that means, one such vessel can take out 1,000 tons of fish, and one day boat can bring back 400 kgs of fish, or maybe 200 kgs of fish. Order of magnitude, you're talking about 2,000 order of magnitude. India has more like 300 to 350,000 vessels, out of which the industrial, or so to say the trawling variety, estimates put them around anywhere between 10 to 20, 25,000. Rest of them are these day boats. The reason auction hasn't changed is because if your catching does not move from day boats to the industrial, it means that you're still not using technologies to freeze the product or to increase the shelf life of the product, which means that it needs to be sold the moment it comes to
Right.
the shore.
Fishermen go out in the night and they come back in
Come
the
back
early
and it
morning
needs
and
to
they
be
got to
sold.
sell whatever they bought.
Absolutely. And that is where the whole auction ecosystem kicks in. Anywhere where there is an industrial ecosystem, it means that they have freezing on board and they're able to freeze it and then sell,
Choose when to sell.
choose when to sell.
In many ways, it's like the agriculture market itself or the
Absolutely.
fruits market, where if farmers have access to a cold chain, they can choose to wait till the prices are better in order to kind of sell it. But if they don't, they're at the mercy of the markets when they.
Given that you bring that parallel, let me then step back and give my own perspective on how the food has evolved and where seafood lands in that entire evolutionary curve. If you look at last 1,500 years, maybe 2,000 years, farming has been a big part of our evolution. And if you look at farming as a technology and how farming has played a role in various different segments, a dairy or a animal husbandry or grains, fruits, veggies, they've all followed one trajectory. Seafood has followed the other trajectory. What I mean by that is every other category apart from seafood today, pretty much everything that you consume is farmed. Basically, you have taken a wild species, you have domesticated it. Now you have to a point where you've industrialized it. It means the controlling you're able to control the factors of production in a very deterministic manner. Seafood is the only category out there where even today 50% of the volume that humankind consumes is still hunting and gathering type, where you don't know what you're going to catch. You're out there in the sea. There's no other food category which has the same kind of setup like seafood. So, which is also where I think I got intrigued as an outsider, as an investment banker, when I started seeing this industry.
Which is very fascinating. Let me go to that, right? You're a Kannadiga. You were born and brought up in Mysore,
Absolutely.
right? And then you did your engineering from NIT
Surat.
Surathkal. And then did you go for your MBA to SPJN right
Yes.
after?
No, I did couple of years of tech stint with a company called Lithium Systems.
Got it.
Yeah,
I know that. ITTIAM.
ITTIAM.
Right. All right. And then you went to SPJN, did your MBA.
yes,
And then you joined TSMG,
correct.
Tata Strategic Man. You spent a couple of years there. Then you moved to investment banking. So, what's going on? What was the first point in time? I know that you ended up joining a
McKinsey.
seafood exports company, but let's backtrack a little bit. What was going through? I mean, after your MBA, you're in TSMG. You spent Tata Strategic Management Group. You spent 2 years there, and then you moved to an investment bank. Everything is predictable till now. Engineering, tech company, MBA, TSMG, investment banking. What's the factor that got introduced there, or what changed there that led you to seafood? Because Mysore is, of course, landlocked. You don't have. I'm
I
assuming
had
nobody
no
in your
relationship.
family has
I had no
no.
relationship with seafood.
Yeah, right.
Not
So
even as a consumer.
got it. Where
So
did it come
yeah, I
about?
think it's an interesting journey where if I double click on my investment banking stint, where I started off, where I was with Tata Strategic, I was fortunate to work in chairman's office. Cyrus had just joined, so that gave me a good perspective on working on some data sets and working very closely with the chairman of the Tata Group. But I was not very enthused in that whole data work. I wanted to do something, create something, but I wasn't sure how, because I come from a background where my father is economics professor. My mom is not that educated. She's in fact she's educated only till some fifth or sixth standard. So there's nobody to guide me in terms of what investment banking means, what consulting means, all of that. It was just that I discovered along the way.
I'm assuming some of that would have happened at SPJN also.
SPJN also. SPJN was a marketing student. So whatever got me was consulting. Then I did my consulting. Then I started learning that there is something called private equity, investment banking. So you can do a lot more shareholder level decisions, all of that. So then start applying for.
So you're discovering and learning as you're
Discovering
working.
and learning, and then I thought, no, this is more exciting. Then I moved to investment banking, and my move to investment banking was also where I reached out to the entire industry. Even today, there are stakeholders who reached out, oh, we are connected. Yeah, this was during the time where I was searching for a job where I wanted a break into investment banking. So this one team that was coming out of Lazard, wanting to set up their own investment banking gig by name Bala. He gave me a break. He said, okay, it's okay if you don't know finance. If you have the necessary attitude and aptitude, I will have you. So that gave me a good window into what corporate finance is.
Sorry, before we move on, can you tell me what Bala might have seen in you back then that a potential founder today should learn to spot when someone writes to them or cold emails them and says, I don't have this experience that you're looking for. So,
I
what
think
did
I
Bala
was
see in
I
you, and
was
what do
will
you see in other people like
I
that?
was willing to walk the talk in terms of saying that I think I voluntarily took a salary cut, and it was not a big salary that I was having at TSMG. And he also could see the passion in me because I'd just gotten married, and was willing to put money on the table. And then I think the discussion was around the fact that I'm willing to go all in. It's not about hustle porn or glamorizing that. It's just that I was truly wanting to learn investment banking and corporate finance and all that. I said, all my time is yours, weekends are yours, I just want to do. And then I remember, before hiring, he was working on a bank and an NBFC merger, and I had no idea about how financial services works, how regulatory stuff works, how all of these RBI things work. He told me, you have 24 hours. I give you these two models. You figure out how to combine these two models and work out a synergy case so that on Monday morning, 10 o'clock, we go to the client. And I only later on I realized he wasn't serious about it. I took
Also,
it,
it was a test.
it was a test, and I took it upon myself. I don't think I slept for 2 days continuously. I learned a lot of stuff around NBFCs, banking, and it was my first gig in financial services. I think that's where he thought that, okay, this kid can possibly commit and also deliver, even if that is. And over time, we got some confidence, and that's what he allowed him to give me a break. And I think that has been the aspect about my career. I always felt that if I can get a seat at the table, rest, uh, I will struggle, do whatever it takes to make it count. So Bala gave me the seat at the table, honestly.
All right, what happened after that?
So after that, I think the thing that I did not have was, I was not from, so to say, a IIT or IIM, and I never actually thought that I could be part of these white shoe big brands, right? This stint actually allowed me to play that game where the counterparties used to be a Goldman Sachs or a Morgan and all of that. And just that, the fact that if you are prepared with your homework, you can actually get into these tables and do something which is impactful. So those 2 years, one, the skill set and all of that around corporate finance, banking, M&A, all of that I learned. But I also got a lot of my own confidence in terms of where I can play and what impact I can add. Because TSMG was about the fact that, yes, if you have your data and if you have your logic, you can actually sit across possibly the biggest corporate, biggest decision maker in the country and do add some value. And this was about repeating that across multiple situations and doing the same thing in a very stressful environment.
Hmm.
And also
So, it was
learning.
really about building your confidence to
Yeah,
do something
do
bigger.
something bigger, right? It's I think the journey is about that. It's a long journey of, so to say, an imposter syndrome, right? You don't really believe that you are there. You get there, and then you hustle.
And then you realize this is not, I can do this.
Yeah, you can do this, and then you push yourself a little bit, right? Like after that banking, then I thought, no, I think I'm still in the boardroom. I'm still designing board decks. I need to do more. Then I moved to O3, which was a mid market. I spent 6 months,
Which is also an investment
which
bank.
is as an investment banking, just that it's mid market, where from boardroom, we went to, let's say, the boardroom of mid market companies, which meant you had direct access to the decision maker. But in 6, 7 months, I realized there that, no, I think this is very cookie cutter. I want to do something more here. So that's when I went to my boss and I told him, look, the gap that I see in the mid market is that we are very transactional in our advice. Can we do life cycle banking? Can we have our own thesis? Can we pick sectors and have our own thesis and go and pick the company which fits into that, and then see over a lifetime what kind of transactions we can offer? Because the reason I offered that is not because it was my brainwave, it was just that I'd seen it working while I was with this ex Lazard team, because that's how they operate. I felt that the mid market doesn't have that quality of advice. And I was very lucky. The boss said, okay, fine, you make your own meal, you pick your own three sectors, you're on your own. And even there, I think the conversation was about, I was willing to cut my salary by half. Like that was the starting conversation. If you think I'm not serious,
Sorry, just quick question. Was your wife working?
she was working. The good part is between that Lazard and O3 was a big jump, like 3-4x jump. So I
All
had,
right.
but my expenses didn't jump so much. So I had a lot to offer. It's almost to a point where what am I doing with so much, right? I can actually put it back in my own learning. So that's where I offered. I said, look, we can do this. And then gave me that freedom. Seafood was a sector which was an outcome of that top down research back in 2015, 2016, where I had pulled down the entire VCC edge to analyze from a first principle standpoint. Where is the revenue? Are there sectors which are untouched by, so to say, smart capital or global strategics and still enjoy good set of fundamentals, which is revenue growth, which is ROCE, which is all of the things. And three sectors emerged out of it. One is seafood, other is flavors and fragrances, third is spices. And I went around speaking to promoters, top 5, 6 in each of these sectors, picked up one mandate in each of the sectors. But love for seafood only grew over time. It's not like other sectors were bad, just that seafood was more attractive for me. And that's what led me onto a path where, like I said, right, I got confidence that yes, I can actually have my own conviction saying that a sector makes sense. And then the next set of action around that is no, then I think I want to double down that on that sector. The best investment in terms of doubling down is actually not your money, it's your time. So which meant that I want to put my, possibly the best part of my career behind that career, behind that sector, which is where I went and joined Neck and Tea. When they were client, I was with them for 2 years, and when they were looking at IPO, they wanted somebody to help. Then I went and joined them. And yeah,
They are a marine seafood export
seafood
company.
exporter. Yeah.
Interesting. I just want to make the observation that this happened, all of this, what happens, about 6 years,
Yes.
right? Like after SPJ and 2
Every
years at
2 years I've
yeah,
shifted.
TSMG, and then the first one, and then the first investment bank, and then O3, and then Neck and Tea is another 2 years. So it's like 2 years, right? The interesting parallel that I'm observing, it's almost like a counter thesis, is that people typically start at an operational level and work their way up to get into, let's say, more strategy, into the boardroom, to finally sitting with, like, CEOs of, conglomerates.
Yeah.
Yours was essentially exactly the
The
reverse. You
opposite.
started with
Yeah.
working with Tata Strategic Management Group, sitting with the Tata Group chairman, and, like, working with him, and then stepping down till you reached an operational level with Nikanti.
So
What did you do
it's
at
a very
Nikanti?
interesting thing. There was a day where I was sitting in a fish
And
market.
of course, salary cuts.
Salary
Because the other
cuts.
thing that marries this, because in the traditional path, as you're going up, your salary goes up. Now you're essentially going down. And each stage, you're also willing to put your money where your mouth is by taking a salary cut. It's a very interesting, counterintuitive, but completely, I think, rational, first principles driven behavior for someone who knows what they're doing. Right? Sorry.
Yeah. No, actually, the point that you made, there was a point in time where I was just starting the business and sitting in a very small, tiny market in some village. And then this whole 10-year thing kind of flashed in front of my mind. So it's like, where was I? I started with Cyrus. Then. So basically, I like incrementally dirtied my hands till the time I reached to a point where I was at the fish market trying to understand how the trade works.
What was Nekanti like?
Neck and Tea is a family managed business, around 1,200, 1,300 crores in terms of revenue. So they earlier hired me to help them in terms of private fundraise. And my own motivation was that I like the second generation, which is trying to get control of the ship, and wanted to use Neck and Tea as a platform to make that a large company. And I joined them.
So was this a company that controlled the full, like, did they grow their own fish and sell it, or it
they
was
were
like
in
they
one
bought
part
it?
of the value chain.
Got it.
So the idea was that there was potential for us to backward and forward integrate, but
Got
more
it.
importantly, also go horizontal. Back then, the vision that we had all aligned, at least with the management there, is can we somehow chart a path where we become Thai Union of India. That's something that
What is Thai Union?
Thai Union is a large company which is $4.5 billion from Thailand, which is a multi-species, multi-origin. Maybe I think when you talk about seafood as sector, I'll cover in detail around some of these archetypes.
Yes, I do remember you mentioning somewhere that any country globally that has this similar kind of coastline that India has will typically see companies in this space, in the seafood or marine food space, in the $5 to $15 billion range, of
Yes,
which I think Thai
absolutely.
Union seems to be the case. But you said for some reason in India we seem to tap out at around the 150 million.
Yeah, exactly. That's
But
where,
we'll come back to that.
yeah.
Let me. So you spent 2 years at Nekanti, and that's when you decide, like, I mean, in your continued journey down the chain, the final
Actually, there
stages.
was one more interesting leg to that. When I decided to get out of Nekanti at the point where they decided not to go public,
Hmm.
that was the point where I said, no, I think this doesn't make sense
Oh,
to me.
interesting. So your entire life story could have changed had they decided to go
Yeah,
public.
yeah, it would have. So they decided not to go public. So we had the document cleared, we had the pre-IPO done, we had the anchor investors also set, but at a valuation which was 15-20% lower than what we initially set out. But that's completely palatable. But they decided to pull the IPO back. That, if you ask me, is something that's a blessing in disguise, because that changed the trajectory of my life. I obviously didn't want to be a senior leadership in a family managed company. Also, I think the whole glamour of working in a family managed company kind of had worn off by then. Second, I didn't want to go back to working. Uh, I didn't want to go back to any banking or any of that job. So I think the only thing that I could think of at that time was to become an investor. So I became an investor. I could put together a small fund of 40 crores or something, which is essentially from friends in the seafood sector in Vizag, because Vizag happens to be like an ecosystem. And a mandate for this fund was to invest only into meat and seafood startups in the world, in the country.
So you stuck with your concept of having a thesis
Yeah,
and then only investing rather than being
absolutely.
opportunistic.
Yeah. So my thesis was around omni-channel back then, because I studied the D2C, I studied omni-channel, I invested in 4 companies. And idea back then was to create a platform. I invested in a retail chain in Bangalore, in Chennai, in Hyderabad, and idea was to roll it up and then stitch the back end. So that was the idea. I went around doing these investments. But along the way, I realized that Captain Fresh idea, which we'll talk about, which I started to think that yes, there is potential for me to do something. And also, I think there was a point in time where I realized I could be an entrepreneur. Maybe because I started meeting these new age entrepreneurs and started realizing they are actually operating out of a lot of first order principles, first order insights. Thanks to my own vantage point of having seen this industry from various perspectives, top down analyst, as an operator, as a investment banker, trying to sell a IPO issue, working with a lot of public market investors, and then as an investor, I thought I had a unique vantage point. And because of that, that gave me some second, third order insights, which I thought could be the foundation for
Again, this
Captain
is
Fresh.
very interesting because again, I'm seeing a reverse path, right? Like you seem to have, as you went down the stack, so to speak, and you've reached the family owned business level. And like you rightly said, right now, you see them operating, and then you realize that in some sense, it's like another version of the imposter principle, right?
Yeah,
Earlier, it's like, oh, what happens in boardrooms isn't really that hard. And now you're at this stage where you're like, oh, running a business can be reduced to a certain set of first principles and you can do it. In some sense, it gives you the confidence to be an entrepreneur as well. Again, to just contrast that against the traditional career paths and why often people find it hard after 10 years or 15 years to become an entrepreneur unless they really have it in them is because in the traditional career path you're going further and further away from where the action is
yeah,
to where the strategy is and the boardrooms are, and that sort of disconnects you from
very
where the
much.
opportunities are. So it's very
Absolutely.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So what was your Captain Fresh thesis? What was this, 2016?
No, we started in 2020.
Hmm.
Actually, there was a year where I tried to experiment with a company called Nekkanti Consumer Foods, which is
Hmm.
like a corporate arm of
Got it.
Nekkanti. The Captain Fresh beginning was June of 2020. Yeah, so we are around,
Thick
yeah,
in pandemic.
yeah, thick in pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, bang in the middle of pandemic. So I think before we talk about Captain Fresh, maybe I think it would be good to paint what seafood as an industry is and why I saw opportunity. Because what we bring in as the foundational principles make sense when we talk about seafood in totality.
Okay, hold that thought. Let me just quickly step back and ask you, what is Captain Fresh?
Today, Captain Fresh is a packaged seafood company which operates in its own brands. These brands are acquired brands, and we operate in US and Europe. We are today doing close to around 9.5 to 10,000 crores of revenue, and profitable, operating across these two markets, which two put together form close to 95 to 96% of our revenues.
How big is Captain Fresh in terms of people today?
We are around 800 people,
And if I'm not mistaken, you've raised close to about what, 240,
to
$250 million in
20
venture?
to 30 million, including the equity swap. If you
Hmm.
just count the cash that we have raised, it's in the range of, I think, 180, $190 million.
Interesting. All right. Now let's go back to what you were trying to tell us about the seafood space and
Yeah.
how to contextualize Captain Fresh's origin stories into that.
So, seafood, like I said at the beginning, the supply chain is still very complex because half of the supply chain is still nature driven. It's God's gift, basically. So, there is one half of the supply chain where fish is for free. You spend going to catch the fish. So, if you don't know where to go, you end up
Right.
spending a lot of money. And there are very few
And I've
technologies.
seen that, and it's one of the most saddest sights to
Absolutely.
see fishermen coming back
Without
in the
anything.
morning with empty boats, and you can kind of see from their body language and faces, because the entire night they've spent, fuel cost, time, all of that spent, and they come back. And if you know, I mean, of course, you know this way better than I do. For them, it is literally a daily livelihood sort of thing. Many of the artisanal fishermen.
I think from what I have seen, if you plot the different work streams by different industries, I don't know if I'm biased to say this, but I think this is one of the highest risk, highest, lowest payout sector, uh, which is also the industry problem, which is there's no father who wishes his son to get into this sector. And this is not just at the upstream, it plays out through the value chain. That is the problem in this industry. Unless there is something that is non-linear which helps in terms of efficiency curve, this industry is actually sitting on a very, very shaky ground. Right. So going back, like I said, half the supply chain is completely unpredictable. The other half, which is aquaculture, which behaves like an agriculture, while on the face of it seems predictable, but
By
even
aquaculture, you mean like fish and marine seafood, which is raised inland in
inland, yeah,
ponds, etc.
correct. So that is close to 60% of your volume, and that's actually the one that has shouldered the growth. If you see, the wild caught volume over the last 20 years has been almost constant. All the growth in this industry has been driven by aquaculture. And aquaculture as a play, like I said, on the face of it, theoretically, it looks like it's predictable. You can control the different variables there. But the most difficult part about aquaculture is here is the only production system where you have your payload underwater. So you don't know what is under the water. Like I said,
You
there,
put it like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
fish is free, catching is expensive. Here, catching is free, fish is expensive. But you're actually throwing money into the water, not knowing how much biomass is there underwater. So most of the farmers who lose in this industry are those who are exposed to some kind of biorisk, who would have, let's say, seeded a million animals and then eventually realized that only those many have survived, whereas their assumption while feeding is certain other assumption. So even this has a substantial amount of risk, right? So predominantly this forms the foundation of your supply chain. Now think about an entire industry built on top of this kind of supply chain, which has predictability or which is a fundamental problem, right? So then there are many layers to this supply chain when it comes to processors. You're coming to cold storages, warehouses, distribution. Every each of these layers built on this shaky foundation. The problem is you have this volatile supply chain and you have a lot of high operating leverage businesses.
What does that mean?
which means that you have set up like the one that you mentioned. You have bought a vessel which has an
Hmm.
high operating leverage,
Right. You
right?
bought it on loan. You got to buy fuel for
Absolutely.
it.
You
All
have
of
a
that.
overheads. If you don't get your volume, you are making losses. Then you have factories. You are running it
In
in
this, to use an analogy that most people will understand, it's like buying a taxi, going out every day,
not
and then
finding the
you're not
customers.
finding a ride, and then coming back at the end of the day, and you
Absolutely.
still need to pay the fuel bills and the EMIs and all of that.
Absolutely. Same thing works out on the factory side, whose job is to take these products, process it, make it semi-finished or finished so that it's easy to cook or eat. And even they have one semi-fixed cost, which is they get their labor. They have a labor waiting for the product. There is a very high possibility product doesn't arrive. And then they have their whole factory setup, electricity, rental, all of that to manage. And then further downstream, you have these cold storages, warehouses, all of that. Further downstream, you have these distribution, vehicles, all of those investments, right? So essentially, if you see an entire industry, it's a $600 billion industry. If you see all of the balance sheet investments, it's close to $1 trillion, right? Sum total of all of these biomass, land, all of these, it's like $1 trillion. By and large, funded by debt because this is not an industry which has been sexy for equity, right? So that's the problem of this industry, right? And it's fragmented. The largest player in this industry globally is less than 1% of the market share. Now, to give you a perspective, every other food category,
Including meat, of course.
including meat, of course, the largest player is at least 10%. Now, what does this mean to the industry? To give you one number, Nestle and Danone have spent $20 billion just in R&D over the last 10 years. The entire seafood industry, last 10 years, haven't spent more than $2 billion. What does that?
There's also a little bit of chicken and egg. Na? If the industry is so fragmented, then no one player is incentivized to spend on R&D. Counterintuitively, if nobody's spending on R&D, then it's not going to get
Absolutely. So, which is
organized.
essentially, absolutely a chicken and egg issue because if you look at every other category, whether it's dairy, whether it's meat, any other category, there is a moment in time in their history evolution where it's moved from high involvement purchase, a messy purchase to a impulse purchase. From a consumption, it's almost a snack type of consumption. Whether it's a KFC moment or a McDonald moment for a poultry, or whether it is whey moment or a
Or potatoes and lay
yeah,
movement.
lay moment.
Hmm.
Seafood hasn't had that moment. Today also seafood purchase, like you started the call with, it's a messy purchase. You need to plan, you need to struggle, you need to go to that auction center, you need to spend all of that energy. Of course, that's not the entire purchase behavior, but even if I go to Amsterdam and purchase, like if I walk into an aisle, I'll have to cross through all of these dairy and all of these flashy brands that are screaming out saying my proteins are good, and then go to the end of the corner where it's in some small place seafood is thrown in to pick up the seafood. It's not it's not screaming. It's the voice of the share of voice is so low of this category, it doesn't get the attention of the customer, right? So that's the fundamental problem of this sector, which is the chicken and egg issue, like you mentioned. The players are smaller, industry is fragmented, the balance sheets are very weak, it's very very fragmented, and balance sheets are funded by debt, and these debts happen to be very expensive debt, not bank debt. These are all hand loans, right? 25-30%. Imagine $1 trillion industry funded by this kind of loan sharks and operating in the environment that I
Which is
mentioned.
like the worst possible combination, right?
It's
High
a worst
interest
possible
rate
consumer.
combined with highly unpredictable likelihood of success, which
Absolutely.
I'm assuming is one of the key reasons why people get pushed deeper into debt and
It's a trap.
death, suicides, etc. All of that.
It's a
Hmm.
trap. So that's the thing that I saw as an outsider. When I saw this industry, there was a point where I did this 90-day journey going through the course, meeting the stakeholders. Because for me, the point that I had to prove to myself is that can I do this? Going back to the imposter syndrome, right? Like all I had done was design
Your
slides,
reverse path from boardroom
boardroom
to
to this, but then
auction.
this was as raw as it could get, right? You sit
Yeah.
in that, let's say, a Vizag jetty, and you're staring at these folks, and there are like thousands of people, and there is a sun rays, and you're seeing that, okay, can you really do this? It's enormous. The complexity is so overwhelming. So that point, for me, the biggest question was, can I do this? And the second biggest question was, why hasn't anybody else done it? Because even at a global level, Tyson or Nestle for
Which
that
is one
matter,
of the largest meat businesses
made
in the US.
businesses, so they are serving the same customers, pretty much the same need states, same proteins, right? It's so logical for them to come into this. Why haven't they come into this? So those were the questions that I really struggled with. And here is where my journey kind of helps me, because I started at the board level. For me, it was about answering the board level questions, even for me personally, before I go to the unit economics, and really about the execution and the people, right? So it was from there. So the big question for me was, why is this still the same? Last 1,000 years, like every other industry you can think of, automobile, anything that you can think of, fabric, anything, is a dwarf in terms of history when you compare it with seafood. Like seafood is something from a Greek empire to a every empire, every village starts with fishing village as a background,
Right.
right? So it's so counterintuitive to think that it's so unorganized at a global level, right? So that is a big question for me to answer. I think finally the way I reconciled is that nobody has really attempted this problem statement from a technology standpoint, using an approach where you have these assets. How do you make these assets to work for you, binding them, with a layer of technology? I think the confidence that, or where I drew confidence, was from obviously a lot of big successes like, say, a Uber or a Airbnb or Amazon, which has done similar thing. They've taken such trillion, 2 trillion
So
kind of.
yeah, to use the same analogy we used earlier, Uber solved for the problem of, if you sit in a taxi and go out onto the road, you shouldn't have to worry about will there be a passenger. The
Absolutely.
platform and the tech will solve for that.
Absolutely. So, in some form and shape, that started. And then closer home, I started learning about the business models of a Ninja Card, Udan. Some of them are there, some of them are not there. But from a business model standpoint, was an inspiration that, yes, yeah, you can actually build some of these tools, both on the demand side, on the supply side, to be able to have some advantage over the traditional players in terms of being able to aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and be a facilitator. And then clearly, India looked like a right entry point for me, because if you looked at it globally, while yes, globally it's all fragmented, but for a upstart like me to enter, it was difficult. Even while it is fragmented, India offered a best entry point because it was super, super fragmented at every level.
Right.
And even an upstart like me could enter and get to a critical mass very, very quickly. So all of that were the factors that helped me.
So what was your original Captain Fresh hypothesis? Was it always a export driven hypothesis? What was, like, I mean, in 2020, what was the business that you started? Because you have gone through some pivots along the way, right?
See, export is a business that I really understood well when I started
Because
Captain Fresh,
Nikanti
because I, in
mm-hmm.
fact, had spent 4 years in exports. And when I had done Series A, I had always said exports we will do. And it's almost like I knew what to do with the exports. I didn't know what to do with domestic. Domestic on paper looked extremely exciting. 25 billion dollar industry, almost not a single multi-city organized player. And whatever experiments we had done, at least on the revenue basis, we would fly off the chart, always beat our expectations. So the initial promise was very exciting on the India side.
What was it? Did you have a branded
So
play
we
back
ran
then?
a B2B business.
Got
So
it.
we started with, so again, the thesis when I started was that customer is underserved when it came to seafood. What I meant by that is, a customer today, his need state is seafood, whereas the supply ecosystem is designed as a roe katla supplier or a shrimp supplier or a tuna supplier or a something, right? Shrimp supplier. So there is nobody who is able to give a 360-day solution to a customer. Then the critical question was, who is the customer? Should we talk about the end customer? Should we talk about a customer one level behind, which is a B2B customer? My own thesis back then was B2B customer is better because he himself is underserved. So if you solve for his problem, even the customer's problem gets elevated. And if this becomes the foundation, then at some point you can actually think of going all the way to customer. So to begin with, you don't need to go to the customer. And then the back thesis to that
Also, it
is
saves you one major pillar, which is establishing a customer brand, investing in marketing, all of that stuff, right? Because you
all
can
of that
test it
stuff.
out with
Because
B2B.
my thesis around that was seafood is a commodity to begin with. And commodity success is scale. And for us to establish a brand wherein what is brand is being able to deliver on a promise consistently. And in an industry which has so much predictability issues, consistency is only because you have a supply chain which is robust. And this robustness of the supply chain comes from scale.
And
So
thus, B2B
thus
is, yeah.
B2B is a logical first step. And also if you study the evolution of commodities to packaged food,
And to
right?
brands, it
And to
always starts
brands,
with, yeah.
it always starts with B2B, supply chain, thick supply chains, and then innovation on top of these supply chains, having that control of the product and that product becoming brand over a period of time. That is the so I while yes, I was a tech guy, trying to be a tech guy, but I was a very traditional in that thought process. So I couldn't convince myself around this whole D2C opportunity or going all the way to the customer right at the start. So I started with this whole building critical mass using Indian B2B customers. We did that for 18 months or 24 months of our journey, first 24 months.
Would this be what they call the Horeca segment?
Both
Hotels, rest.
Horeca, retail. So in fact, we started with the D2C players as our customers.
All right.
Then we moved to modern trade. But these two put together is less than 2% of the market. You run out of it very quickly for two reasons. One, they also cap you out at like 25-30%. They don't want one single supplier to, because this is all it is, right? So which means that we would get to 20-30% of the city very quickly. And we expanded to 20-25 cities before we even paused and started looking at where it makes sense, where it doesn't make sense. And there's also, in all candidness, the whole 2020, 2021 era where world was very different. So we scaled rapidly. We went to $100 million. We were the largest, seafood player with domestic focus, operating across 20-25 cities. And that was a moment where I stepped back and I started seeing that I don't have a business which can give me the economics, right economics. So this was March 2022 when we had raised a Series C, which is around $50 million at around 450 million pre-money, and which meant that I was at 100 million and I have to now think of a billion, right? And also as a banker, I also started seeing that there is this real winter that is setting in. And that was a point in time I had to kind of step back and see for all the competencies that we have developed, which is I have a supply side competency, I have certain digital tools that I have built. Yes, I am in certain cities while I have experimented with various different personas on the retail side. Some markets make sense. Like, for example, Indiranagar market, a Kormangla market makes sense. But as you go deeper in the market, it just becomes one, the gross margin shrinks. And on top of it, your credit receivables quality becomes more and more toxic. So it's a double edged sword. So, which means that,
What is your gross margins because of the willingness to pay a premium? Is that what
yes.
it is?
So, these markets, like, I think finally what we kind of hypothesized in terms of what we learned is that any market where the per capita income was north of $10,000, our gross margins were healthy at around 20%. And that could lead to a very healthy EBITDA contribution margin, which is around 4-5%. And here is a thing that you rotate almost 20 times in a month, in a year. So 4-5% on 20 times, it's a good 80% return on capital employed business. Where it started hurting is as you go to the suburbs of Bangalore, this 20% drops to like 12-13%. As you go to Mysore, this 12% drops to like 4-5%. Right. So that drop, one, we couldn't envisage that it's such a sharp drop. And the second thing we couldn't envisage is in India, especially in some of these markets, they have never seen the concept of invoice. they always in their mind take that invoice while they don't really recognize that as a payable. They know that the guy will come eventually and they'll negotiate something. There's always a negotiation in their mind. Whereas we think that we have given the invoice, this is our revenue, this is our gross margin, this is our receivables, right? So that part, especially for an organized player, when my employee has to go and collect the money, we ended up losing a lot of money in the context of things in terms of writing off our receivables. So that meant that we don't have a sustainable business in the country, which can be powered at the same growth rate that we had set as expectations to all the stakeholders. So raising capital at such steep valuation was a mistake, which we did. I can now sit back and say mistake, but back in those days, it that was the game, right? So
It's like when you're looking forward, when you're powered by momentum, you can only look forward.
yeah.
I mean, it takes you some time to look backward and reflect and understand that. But yeah.
So that's how it played out.
May I ask you how much you're valued today? Do you disclose that publicly?
Yeah, no, we do. I think we are not too far away from where we were that
Got
time. So I think what I have done post that is actually those post that valuation, Rohin. There was an year and a half I really regretted that I raised money at this valuation.
And you have to wait for that valuation to catch up with reality.
Yeah, I think we took the next 2 years to grow into that valuation. And today, I honestly believe we are a value deal at wherever we are doing.
So you, I mean, in your mind, you're saying you went from overvalued to you waited it out 2 years where it
Correct.
was at par value, and now your business has run ahead of that, which is why you're saying you're.
I think we are a
good
value deal today.
Got it.
In a way, I think the classic transition is that we sold the business on narrative, and very quickly the world shifted to financial ratios. As a business, we took almost 2 years to grapple with that change. And now I think it's been a year where I think we have really gotten to a place where even on a financial ratios front, we make sense. And to be able to do this as a founder, yes, I think one of the hard call that I've taken, it's not like I had a lot of choice to push the valuation up, but wherever I had a choice, I have been very restrained in terms of keeping it under control so that, if you are undervalued, I believe as a founder, it's a superpower.
I was just going to ask you this question. Tell me more about, because this isn't talked about a lot. Because the default narrative around valuations and founders is always like higher is better, higher is better. But I'd argue that people who read these news in the newspapers don't really understand that higher valuation comes with higher expectations. And but I, just help us understand what you said, that it's better to have a more reasonable valuation where you might be slightly undervalued. Why is that better for a founder and for an organization?
Let me caveat this. I'm a founder who's experienced, touch and feel category, which has a balance sheet, which has a strong balance sheet element to it.
So you're saying it's not a purely digital business?
Yeah, it's not a purely digital business. So let me not talk for other founders who are
Got it.
experiencing
Sure.
a very
Not a
different,
software business, not an AI
not a
business.
different non-linear curves and all of
Sure.
that, right? So I'm not that. I am a traditional business with some technology to enable my business. I almost say that it's actually that in a 2020, if a founder is starting something and if he doesn't have as much technology as I do, then founder has a problem. So it's not necessary that I'm a very special tech founder. I'm actually a businessman trying to do business in seafood with technology is something that we think of on a regular basis. Now, for a founder like me, what I felt is that very quickly, these kind of businesses catch up with financial ratios. And there is this general expectation that even these businesses can be sold on narratives
and tech-like valuations.
Which is a wrong thing. If there are so many, so to say, mortalities at a growth stage in B2B, it is largely because companies ran so ahead of their valuation. In some cases, founders couldn't take the tough calls, or in some cases they yielded to some shortcuts and it led to some mishaps, right? But the core driver for all of this is that they have such a high valuation and the fundamentals don't support that.
Again, I mean, if I would allow me to use an analogy, because I'm a huge fan of analogies, it's in some ways like you're driving a car and your most recent deal expects you to keep the car constantly between 80 to 90 kilometers per hour. Now, if you do, you cannot slow down, because if you slow down, then you're thinking, my deal. So the risk of unforced errors or accidents just goes up when
Compounds.
you're all the time
Yeah.
trying to maintain
Yeah.
that valuation
Which
that
is
you've
why I
sold.
caveated that for an offline business like us, that need for speed can be fatal. For a just a very, very non-linear tech only business could still
Sure.
survive that kind of a speed. I don't know, maybe I'm naive in saying that there could be other complications there, but from what I see from far, and offline businesses with so many moving parts, the pressure to grow so fast simply because you've set wrong expectations and you have raised valuation at wrong business, or your own understanding of the market is also, you also discover, right, as a founder. Yes, you know, maybe 6 months ahead, 1 year ahead of other stakeholders, but eventually you also know only so much. So as you discover, high valuations don't allow you to be intellectually honest. I think that leads to a lot of mishaps, which is what I learned post that the 2 year period. But the good part about our learning was
This is what, 2022 to
2022.
2024.
This learning, at least this trigger, happened when I had highest amount of capital in my bank, not when people started asking me tough questions. I think that I have been extremely fortunate. The start point of this entire pivot from India to global actually was when we had the highest amount of capital and maximum amount of cushion, which is when I questioned in terms of, okay, I've got this much amount of capital. What's the right way for us to go forward from here? Do I really have the right things to return? And given that I came from a private equity background, it was easy for me to go back and think that, okay, in a private equity world or in a financial ratios or an IPO world, this number doesn't mean anything, right? So, how do I really discover a real business now that I have all of these competencies, capital, all of that, right? That was the moment to kind of pause and think and then recraft the next 2, 3 years of our journey.
What happened then?
So essentially, I think what I did is to go around the world, look at the customers in the US, in Europe. Again, the point that I made in the beginning, that the business that I understood really well was exports. The customer that I was exposed to while doing business development, etc., were the US retailers or European retailers. So there was some learning and some broad understanding of what the market looked like. But I really wanted to go deeper, especially with my lens of having learned what I've learned in India. I spent a good, I would say, 4 to 5 months. I was fortunate to be able to unplug and do all of this while the India business was doing what it was doing. But we started pulling back on a lot of growth measures. We didn't start cutting it, but we started moderating our growth. And those 4 months, I came back with, I would say, a conviction that one, seafood as a category globally is unorganized. That was the biggest contrarian thought, which in fact I took time later on to convince my stakeholders, my board, because it's not a easy point to be made that seafood, which is such a old category, even at a global level, is unorganized. Second is whatever GTM that we could think of, we'll talk about the GTM. Me as a
That's
founder,
your go-to-market strategy.
yeah, me as a founder can pull this off. Now, obviously, me as a founder has we I had guided something for the last 24 months, and what I am guiding now is different from those what I had guided. I had to earn that as well from the stakeholder set for them to be able to trust that yes, now I think this is the right path to. So those are some of the 3 or 4 things that I got clarity on. Going back to how I operate is also how I operate. First, I think the biggest stakeholder that I really want to convince is myself. And I really take that time to convince myself on some of the decisions, because once I am convinced, I know that we'll figure it out.
What does that process look like for you, convincing yourself?
For me, it is about stepping back, getting out of the now daily hustle, looking at it more like a top down solitude, reading books, uh, connecting dots, speaking to a lot of stakeholders. And then there are these brain waves when you are pausing and reflecting, things start connecting, right? And I'm okay to do this as long as it takes. Like in this case, I think it was I went to US, I visited 40 cities. I went to Europe, I visited 40 cities. I used to go every city. I used to visit a retail store, yeah, 10 to 15 retail stores. I would go to the wet market. When you do this, and then you take pictures of the aisles, then you are traveling, you're seeing these pictures, you're seeing how things are evolving. There's so many of these thoughts that come through, and then you have the benefit of having done this in India, building some of the technology tools and where it has failed. So all of this is what gives me that time to reflect. And I'm also somebody who reads history and some of these books which help me in terms of getting the compass right. So that's the process for me. It's solitude. It's really this whole
Synthesis.
synthesis, signals from outside, stepping back and really be able to get to a point where when I know, I think, now it makes sense.
What was your first export move on tactic?
So, what we had built, stepping back, the value chain looks like this, right? So, one part of the value chain is you being able to plug into the fishermen and farmers to source the raw material. Now, when it comes to domestic part of the value chain, that entire raw material just moves to the retailers. It ends there. But when it comes to exports part of the value chain, there is one part called the processors who come into play. And it was the processors that I worked for neck and like this is part of the value chain that I really understood really well. So the next logical step,
What do they do?
they take this raw material, convert it into a finished product
Got
or
it.
a ready to eat, ready to cook product, and that process involves cleaning the shrimp, cleaning the fish,
Cutting
deboning,
them to
cutting them,
standardized.
standardized cuts, etc., and then freezing, some cases putting it out in the bags of a retail brand or in some distributor brand, and then putting it out on a ship for exports. That's what it means. And then those infrastructures, typically it takes 20 to 25 million dollars of investment per factory. You need US FDA approval. It's like a pharma, right? So that's what it entails. And this is a part of the value chain that I understood really well. And I also knew what's the opportunity in that industry, in that part of the value chain. One is it's a over invested part of the value chain, because in the last 10 years there has been a lot of incentives government came up with, so
For seafood
for
exports.
seafood exports or food processing in general. So there's a lot of infrastructure that's created, and infrastructure is created without proportional downstream capability set created, which meant that this infrastructure, especially in the COVID era, was stressed. There is no downstream capability set. The second grade infrastructure, or
Stressed in the sense of they're not getting utilized enough.
yes, second grade infrastructure to second tier factories, they dropped on the utilization. And I know I made this point on operating leverage, right? The moment the volume drops, the stress compounds. So I knew that I could access these facilities very easily. There are like 800 of them. Second, the problem statement I knew very intimately was that while I was at Nekanti, one of the side projects that I tried to do is to get the ERP implemented. I got SAP B1 and TCS Ion to spend time on the factory floor. And my learning from that is, while yes, there are 4 factories which belong to the same owner, but each factory has its own workflow, which is a function of the factory owner. And no large ERP provider, it's worth their time to come and spend in terms of configuring and getting it done. So, which meant that this industry is zero digitized. So if you are a owner trying to take a decision on this industry, you are basically running a trust-based business, because you put your cousin as a factory manager. You trust that he takes the right decision because you don't get the real-time data. What is the outcome of that? Outcome of that is Andhra factory manager or owner will not put a factory in Tamil Nadu. Forget Tamil Nadu, will not even put to Nellore because he won't have a cousin in Nellore. So there was no pan-India processor who has a factory in Gujarat, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, not a single one. Which meant the digital layer is critical. Ability to get data real time is very critical for you to be able to manage factories across different regions in India. Now, if you are able to crack this in India, you can do this in the world, because the same tool can help you access facilities in Indonesia, in Vietnam. What I also did alongside is I had a hypothesis that the same opportunity exists in other parts. Then I put somebody like a Bain to confirm on that hypothesis. They went to Indonesia, Thailand, even to Europe. They came back with the thing that whatever you see in India as a opportunity is the same opportunity in terms of fragmentation, in terms of low on digital usage. So that gave me a huge step up in terms of our playbook. That yes, now we have cracked a multi-species sourcing using the India market. If we can expand into processing using this hook as digital ERPs as a hook to digitize the factory and get into the factory floors, use the supply that we have, convert it into finished products and export, you can become a multi-origin exporter. So that was our first baby step into exports, where we went and took, I think, almost half a dozen factories across 6 states in the country on a profit share basis, where we said we will put the money on the inventory, we will ensure your capacity is optimally utilized, and for the profits that we make, we split evenly without signing any minimum guarantees. So in this process, we went from $100 million domestic local to local player to a $100 million local to global player in a matter of 4 to 6 quarters. And we had used the same supply that we had built to reorient them from India market to the global market. So that was the first baby step towards export. There is a reason I'm calling baby step there, because when I had done the IPO for, rather the roadshow for my ex-employer, it was in some form and shape a similar business I was trying to get IPO'd, which is an exporter, but obviously they were one species, they were asset heavy exporter. I knew
What was it? Shrimp?
it was shrimp. I knew the kind of structural questions and limitations that model had. Basically, you will be exposed to tariff risk, currency risk, etc. So, unless you're vertically integrated, you will not have a, so to say, good business model. You will always have a high risk business model.
What does that mean? Like, what does vertically integrated mean? Like,
Vertically
from
integrated
farms
means that
to
now I have
processing.
cracked the farm, I've cracked the processing. Unless you are in the distribution, where you are able to sell to our ultimate customer in the US and Europe, you are still taking a lot of risk in terms of currency, in terms of tariff, etc., etc. That's the vertical integration part. So we had built a multi-origin export play, but it was not vertically integrated. So that came the last step of Captain Fresh evolution in terms of this whole internationalization strategy, where we went after M&A, inorganic playbook, to complete that entire stack in terms of vertical
These are the four,
integration.
five brands that you own today.
Yes, we own around 8 brands. We
Eight
have
brands.
done equal 9 acquisitions across these markets, and that kind of completed our,
What sort of, these are what, packaged seafood brands?
these are packaged seafood brands, either going into the restaurants, the chefs recognize these brands, or these are distributors who have relationship with the retailers, decade long relationship with retailers, particularly in the European market, with infrastructure in Europe to be able to cater to the last mile requirements of the retailer. Like, to give example, in Europe, out of the 20 large retailers, we work with 15 of them directly, like Aldi, Lidl, Auchan, Carrefour, Mercadona. The reason we work with them directly is we have acquired a player in, let's say, Paris, in Poland, in Denmark, in Barcelona, who have a facility closer to the retailer, who can convert the product, that's the output of the factories in India, to a much more value added product as requested by the retailer. These are ready to eat product or chilled products. So we do 100% of our sales in Europe is chilled. We do around $450 million in Europe. All of that is chilled in nature, which is ready to eat in nature. And that needs infrastructure, and that infrastructure is what we have bought in Europe to be able to service these retailers. So either that or brands that are recognized by food service, particularly the luxury dining space. These are the brands that we have bought in the US and Europe over the last 2 years.
How does it insulate you from tariffs?
Because these brands give me optionality to be able to source from whichever market that I want, depending on tariff. So,
Got it.
if I am only an exporter,
I got it.
I'm looking supply out. But when you have the demand, you can reconfigure the supply chain. Like, to give you an example, we were 66% Indian Ocean in the first half of 2024. In the first half of 2025, which is when the tariff hit, we reversed that mix. Indian Ocean became 33%. LATAM became 66%.
So you're sourcing the fish from those places?
Yes, we increased the mix when the tariff kicked in.
Interesting. If you've been a long-time listener to this podcast and are glad we're back, do tell the world by sharing this episode with everyone you think will find it valuable. Produced by Udantika Kashyap and mixed and mastered by the wonderful Rajiv CN, our resident sound engineer. This is me, Rohin Dharmakumar, signing off. We'll be back soon with another episode.